And welcome to Nurses and Hypochondriacs, Stephen Towill.
Hi there, how are you doing?
Cool. So I'm so excited to have this conversation with you today. So tell us a little bit about yourself.
Okay, well, I'm a hypnotherapist. I'm from Scotland, Glasgow in Scotland, for those of you that can understand my accent. And although I specialize in sort of clinical hypnotherapy, helping people with anxieties or mindset issues, fears, etc., I also specialize in things like past life regression and a thing I call between lives, which is more of the where you would be if you weren't in a life. So really that's the sort of what I do sort of full time.
So how did you get into doing hypnotherapy and especially past life regressions? Because I read in one of your blogs that Dr. Weiss was one of your you were very inspired by him. I was very inspired by him too. I read several of his books. I used to watch him on Oprah Winfrey. I almost went to his he has like an area in New York, in upstate New York. I forget what it's called, school, I guess, or just a retreat center. I almost went there to go take his courses. I was so into him at one point. And then I think I read something about him and which really turned me off.
Right.
Which is what happens when I follow a guru. You know, when I
Yeah.
follow someone, and I've since learned to just really use a lot of discernment and take whatever is resonating with me and leave the rest. So
Exactly, that's the best way to do it. Yeah, I mean, I think Dr. Brian Wise is one of the sort of main big names that do the sort of thing I do. I mean, I got into it, I think you asked me when I got in, and I got into this when I was probably about 17. So that was about 30 years ago. And it was pure fascination. That was all. I was always curious as a kid on the unexplained. It was anything to do with ghosts or UFOs, spontaneous human combustion, all these types of strange things that happen, doppelgangers. And so I used to read books and read stuff on all this unexplained. And when I was hypnosis, for some reason, was something that stuck in my mind. So when I was about 17, when I started college, first thing I went and done was found a book on hypnotherapy. Well, hypnosis, it was actually a psychology book and one of the driest books I've ever read. But I read through this book and I don't think I learned very much from this book, except that it gave me a rough idea how to do hypnosis. And way back, this is 1991, so the internet wasn't really a thing. The books in the library didn't have much, so I was sort of blind trying to figure out what is hypnosis and past life regression. I guess I must have read about that. So really at 17, my first guinea pig was my youngest brother.
I love it.
What else are your brothers, for brothers and sisters to experiment on? But my brother was only 6 and I was 17, and I had him picking daisies out of the carpet, and then I had some of my friends doing silly stuff. So, but the first past life regression I did was my brother David, at 6 at the time, and it was someone that was writing a children's book. He was dying of a skin disease. This is a 6-year-old telling me this. Wow. He was telling me name places of where he lived, and they all correlated to places. And he was also telling me how he was worried about his family because he was dying of a skin disease, and that he was worried about how his wife and his child will sort of survive when he leaves. So it was really interesting for a 6-year-old to be coming up with such adult type concerns and things. So that's where I started. I started way back then, and from there it's just been a bit of a passion for most of my life. So
I'm curious about your brother. Is he a writer right now?
He's a writer. No, he's a managing director of a sort of what do you call them, like a company that fits washing machines and cookers.
Oh, wow.
So he's quite a talented guy. He's been a chef. He's been he was actually a gas fitter. He's been a whole other things. He's quite a talented guy, but I don't know if I can take credit for that, for opening his mind a little bit to the creative sides.
I know, right? It's interesting how you brought up your brother was so young, and I don't know if you've had clients that bring their children and they're like, my kid is saying these very wild stories, and there've been movies about them. There's a whole series on Amazon where these children will have these past life experiences, and they're here in this life and they have these vivid memories.
Yeah.
They start having nightmares. They start telling their parents things. I mean, I saw there was one about the World War II kid. Uh, and and it's so interesting how he knew what plane it was, and his parents were researching it, and he was right on. And they even connected him with the past life sister, the sister of the man he was in a past life, which was fascinating. And then the one that I loved so much was of the guy who, this kid remembered that he wrote Gone with the Wind, which was so interesting. And he kept saying he wanted to go to Hollywood on vacation, and his parents thought he was crazy. They're like, what? And he had all these vivid imaginary, I don't know, stories that he was telling his parents. And finally they started putting everything together, and he was right on. And they even took him to the man's ranch, and the child, because that's where the man died. He died like in a tractor accident, and the kid was able to show his parents very detailed things. And I think he met with the daughters of this man. It was that's very fascinating.
Yeah, that's a good, I think, if I'm right, the series you're talking about is the Ghost Inside My Child.
Is it? I'm not exactly sure. There's several different stories about this.
I think that's it. It's a whole two series, maybe in three now. But I think, was it the one with the Gone to the Wind? Was that where there was also an actress or something that he liked, and she died young, but there was some kind of controversy?
I'm not exactly sure, because I've seen a couple of them. There's another one on Netflix, and I was trying to get the author on. She wrote a book about near death experiences. So she helped consult on that movie, and she's on there. She might come on next year. She told me she's working on another film about aliens right now. So, but she heavily researched this as well, and has many detailed writings, which I find fascinating. And she also writes about birthmarks, which are interesting, how people can come back and still have various birthmarks. And I see that in clinic all the time, where I see babies come in, and I could tell, I was like, this is a little old lady, or I've seen numerous children with different kinds of birthmarks where you could tell it's just like, someone shot them there, someone speared them. I had a baby newborn recently, had this huge circular, like almost a perfect red circle right in the middle of his chest. And I was like, and his parents were so freaked out about it. I was like, whoa. And in my head, I was like, well, I shouldn't tell them about my past life information. But I could tell, and I tapped into this baby immediately, and he was a soldier, like either Iraq war or one of the more current wars. And he was very young, and he got shot in the chest, and he came back. And that's what I tapped into. And I was like, whoa, but this baby was so happy to be alive. And I think he was actually one of the family members. Like I didn't, because the father was there, and I think he might have been one of the father's brothers, but I didn't go there with them, so unless they're open with it. I do have some patients that are very open, and we can talk about these things, so I've even had very psychic kids where they can read my mind. They're reading my thoughts. It's wild. So
I mean, everything you're saying is, if you go to kids, for instance, children seem to be able to, like that show you're talking about, and if it's the same one that I'm talking about, is some of them are getting night terrors, and they're getting recurring dreams about the things that their deaths. There was one about a plane crashing into New York, and they thought it was the Twin Towers, but the parents started it turned out it was the Empire State Building, and they thought, well, there was never a crash into the Empire State Building. But then when they researched it, a plane did crash into the Empire State. So I think children seem to have a real ability to remember this type of stuff. It's very common, actually. Children do talk about other past lives, even spiritual experiences like ghosts and things.
Right. I've had that.
And the way that I see this is, I mean, there was a Swiss psychologist, I think it was, who was actually part of the Mensa team. His name was Jean Piaget, I think it was, who studied cognitive development.
Right.
And what he came up with was at the ages of 2 to 7 is this pre-construct type way where the mind, the cognitive mind, is still developing, but after 7 is when it starts to go into the kind of
shuts down.
Concrete is, and this is really the development of the critical mind, what is right, what is wrong. Now, quite interestingly, the reason I'm mentioning him and that cognitive development is that there is a Professor Ian Stevenson who studied. So I don't think he's alive anymore. He's Canadian, I think, but he originally was family from Scotland. But he studied children and past life, people that were children that were basically saying that they were someone else in past life. So he went through his career studying these children. And when you talk about birthmarks, his research actually, well, first of all, funnily enough, he actually says it's between about 2 that these memories start to appear in children. By about 7, they actually start to fade. And it's just quite coincidental that matches to Piaget's cognitive development studies. But what Professor Ian Stevenson actually also came up with is that the birthmarks, so something like 35%, so it's a third, more than a third of all the children that he was investigating and studying had birthmarks that correlated to wounds, and when they could find the people that they were claiming to be, when there was a kind of good correlation between the statement the children were making and this who they were supposed to be. So it's one of the objective sort of I guess evidence really of reincarnation. It's one of the few.
So fascinating.
So it's interesting that, as you say, birthmarks, they seem to be an indicator of a wound or or if it's like, it doesn't even need to be birthmarks. Sometimes it's defects as well. So it can be birthmarks or defects that actually match to where the wound or how the person was killed in this past life. So it's quite a fascinating little bit of
I used to work at Children's Hospital, and I worked in a place that I saw all the pre-surgery kids before they went into anesthesia. So I was clearing them for anesthesia. So specifically the plastics department used to see lots of these types of children with very interesting either malformations or birthmarks. Lots of hemangiomas would come in. And I just thought they were fascinating. And at that time, I really was tapping into this and researching it. And I would look at these kids and I was like, why did you come back with that wound? Why? And I would just tell them that. I was just like, why, and they're just like happy little babies, and but it's always such a fascinating thing, and it makes life much more fun. On TikTok recently, there are many parents on there telling these stories. And I think the theme is, what's the weirdest thing that your kid told you? And it's all about past lives, and some of them, like this one was really interesting where this little boy remembered in utero how he ate his sister, but his sister ended up coming back as another birth, and the mom said that she was listening to their discussion one day, and he's like, the little girl goes, remember when you ate me? And he goes, oh, I remember that. And they were having this total discussion about him eating her. And that is what actually happened. The mom said, this is very weird, but the OBGYN had said it looks like the baby ate the other baby, before.
Wow,
And it says that there are very few cases of this, but it does happen, which is it was really interesting. And there was kind of like some remnants or whatever, but then she's hearing this conversation and she's like, this is weird,
yeah.
So that was strange. But there are a lot of these stories going on, which is great because it can sometimes freak a parent out. I've had parents come in and tell me paranormal stories, and sometimes they're not really true because they are actually how can I say, they're putting these thoughts into these children's minds by whatever movies they're watching. So in essence, they're the parents are creating it and they don't even realize it, because it's very subconscious. And I can kind of tell that and look at that. Or sometimes it is the kid is seeing a ghost and they keep telling the parents is like, that's not true, and I just always tell them, I go, the best thing is just to let the child tell the story, and just to let them tell and to see what they are afraid of, because sometimes it does cause issues. I had a patient who kept seeing a ghost in the hallway and he was not going to the bathroom. So he was wetting his bed and he was not defecating. And there was a lot of newness going on in the family. There was a new baby as well. He was now the oldest child. There was a middle child. So there was a lot going on there, but this was the main thing. And he said that it was because he had this encounter where he saw this spirit and he went through it. And the feelings he said, he's like, it made me feel cold. It made me feel weird, because this entity went through him, and he was just way too detailed, on the feeling. So I just told the mom, I go, the best thing to do is just listen to him. And they sat together, told the story. She came out and she was a totally different person. She goes, thank you for telling me that, because I did listen and he told me the story and I understand now. And I go, it's a very simple thing to fix. I go, you can try it. Just throw some holy water in the hallway, stick a nightlight there, and tell him he can go to the bathroom now, like you took care of it. That's all a child wants to know, is that the parent is there to take care of them and to help support them in that, right?
Yeah, definitely.
So let's I'm also interested in the in-between lives, so talk about that.
I guess it's a sort of way of trying to describe this. It's I guess the concept comes from there's a lot of other, you mentioned Dr. Brian Weiss. There's another guy called Dr. Michael Newton who wrote a book called Journey of Souls and Destiny of Souls are the two big ones. And he came up with a term called life between lives. And that idea is that when we die, so there's this place that we go to between the lives. Personally, I call it between lives, but I see it more as our full awareness rather than that we're in a life and then we're back out of it and then we're back in another life. I think we're always perceiving as some sort of conscious entity. So I think for a life that we're living, like the life of me, Stephen, at the moment, is a narrow perception of what I am. So the between life is really the experience of that. We can use a past life, the death point of a past life, for the transition, and it takes you to what happens next. So with hypnosis, it can be suggestive. So it's careful. You've got to be careful how you do it. You don't want to lead somebody. So it's not a case of, okay, go to that death point and tell me when you go to the spirit world, or you want to be a little more, I'll just be what happens next. They'll say, I'm floating outside my body. Okay, what do you do now? And so it's very kind of open questions that I'll ask.
Right.
And what you'll find is, Dr. Michael Newton, he done something like 7,000 test cases in his career.
Wow.
So he came from quite a sciencey family and a science perspective. I think he was a psychologist or a counsellor as well, I think. But he found that this type of work had much more profound effects in helping people through things than his, I guess, the way he worked with sort of counselling. Or so. But what he found was the commonalities that of all the people that they're saying that they're going to this between life place. It's almost a spiritual place where we choose the next lives, and we have soul groups that we will incarnate with. So the people potentially in your family could be other members that you've other souls that you've incarnated in many lives with, and it's all about learning, and it's all about growth of a soul. So from this Dr. Michael Newton, that's pretty much the sort of theme of a lot of the sessions that he was doing, is that this is the purpose of these lives. It's all about growth, going through maybe challenges in life, and through the difficult challenges, they're the things that maybe grow us the most and become strong through hard times. And so it's all about, I guess, this is like a bit of a, how would you describe it? Like a school almost, that we're here learning.
Right. I was watching a movie on simulation theory. It's on Hulu. It's rather new.
Mm-hmm.
And it goes off of Philip K. Dick's books. Do you know Philip K. Dick? He's the science fiction writer.
Right.
He wrote Total Recall and
Right.
those type of movies, several of them. In simulation theory, that's what they said. When you die, some people go to this space. I had a friend, one of my coffee shop friends, he died for 3 minutes, and he was telling me, he's like, oh, I haven't seen you. He's like, oh, it was my turn to be in the hospital because his mate had been in the hospital before, and they were telling me the story, and then he was telling me his story, and he's like, I died for 3 minutes. I was like, where did you go? What did you see? I'm so excited to talk to him. He's like, well, and he was kind of like taken up. I go, I'm sure you saw something, don't you remember? And he goes, all I remember is I went into a big white room. And he goes, and then it was done. And then I was back, they brought him back. And he's like, that's what I remember. And in this simulation theory movie, that's what they showed, that people are kind of in a holding space. So I guess that could be in between, or what they call the Akashic records, maybe.
I think there's so much to it. I think, I suppose you could call something a holding space. I mean, if you mentioned earlier as well about the near-death experiences, and it's a similar thing. I guess it's where we go when we sort of leave this experience, or to me, I think we awaken from this experience. I don't think we die. I think we awaken back to a wider perspective, a higher perspective of our understanding.
I agree. I agree with that.
And I think I guess what you may call a holding space, I guess with the near-death experiences, a lot of people say that they're told they need to go back, and it's a profound feeling. It's a place of bliss, of euphoria. And a lot of the time when you do these between life sessions, that's a common sort of theme as well, is that people will say that it's just peaceful, it's a calmness, it's light, it's all light. And this is where you can, other guides might come forward. So I need to say, watch the way I say guides. I was on a Seattle radio show once, and they thought I was saying gates because my Scottish accent. So a spirit guide. So it's about these other entities that will come forward. For instance, Dr. Michael Newton's work, he mentions, so there's the guides, but there's also quite a lot of the time, a lot of these people are experiencing what a lot of people kept calling a council of elders, or ascended beings, which seem to sit above the guides that will help us in our life path, choose our life path, the lessons that we need to learn. And again, it's when people experience these conscious entities, or whatever they are, it's like they'll explain, they'll just try to describe it, saying it's like a very powerful energy, a very wise energy. And they'll maybe help them to understand more about where maybe they're struggling in their life path, or giving them some guidance in some way. One thing they never seem to ever do is they won't tell you what to do. So it may be that someone may go in with a question, and it may be, should I leave my partner? And so I always kind of laugh to myself a little bit with the questions, because the response that they always give is pretty much the same. If they're asking a guide, for instance, they'll say that the guide is laughing at them when they ask that question, as if we can't tell you that. That's the whole purpose that you're here in this life, is to make your choices and to learn.
Right.
So, and I never believe there's mistakes. I think we make choices that we could maybe make better. And I think that's how we learn. That's how we learn here,
Right.
through all our experiences. And that's what it's all about. It's about the learning. So if a guide or any other being was to give us to tell us what we should do, or what we're going to do, which would influence us potentially to do that, what that's doing is it's retracting from your free will. And it's a bit like going to university and someone giving you all the answers to the tests, and you think, brilliant, I've got all the answers, sit the exams, pass them all, get A's, then go out into employment, and suddenly someone says, oh, you've got a degree in engineering, that's great, can you help us with this? And I've not got a clue what to do with that. I didn't really actually learn any of it. I just got all the answers. And that's a bit like the same idea as if we're given all the answers, or we're told what to do, and the choices are made from us, our whole lessons are almost ruined, because then we would probably never learn anything and need to come back to repeat the lessons in some way. So you'll find that generally free will is never impeded on, but we can be helped and guided sometimes, and to help us to make the choices that we need to make. They may show us past lives where we've made a repeating mistake, and it's for us to realize that we're doing the same in this life as we did in the past life. So this between life place is really it seems to be our spiritual reality, I think.
Right.
You can even ask the higher self to come forward and speak through the person, which can be quite weird sometimes.
Oh yeah, that's so interesting. Yeah.
I know there's Dolores Cannon does a lot of that type. She'll use the
Right.
higher self a lot, but so again, it can be quite funny the way it happens. The person you'll ask the higher self to come forward, and the voice changes, sometimes the tone changes. It can be very matter of fact. It will talk about the person in the third sort of person as well. So she needs to do this, or he needs to, John, James, whatever, needs to sort of focus more on this and blah, blah, blah. So it's quite interesting when this other voice comes through as well, to speak from a kind of the higher self.
Yeah.
So that's the between life. It's, to me, it's a bigger perspective of our reality. And we're like horses with blinkers on. We see just a narrow focus.
It's very true, especially nowadays, because people, I think, just think that we're here on this planet. Like, I've been really looking at this very much in detail for many, many years. There's so much more going on. They think we're just here to have these experiences, maybe go to school, get a job, watch Netflix, and go on a couple of vacations, and that's just about it. I mean,
yeah. And
pretty boring existence in my point of view. I mean,
I'll give you the funny thing is sometimes life does seem a bit boring like that, and I've had a lot of people with past lives that have very boring lives.
Yes, me too.
Yeah, but the beauty of it is,
yeah,
I mean, I think people go in thinking, am I going to be somebody famous? But very rarely they are. They're just another general person. But I once had a client who, I think there's a sort of a choice to make, and they were basically showing two different lives, and one life was very hard. I think they were very angry, this person. They had a really tough life, and they was never happy. Apparently they were ugly. They just never married, and it was a pretty grim sounding life. But then they were showing this other life. They jumped into this other life, and I'm trying to get to the end of the session, and suddenly now we're doing another life. I've only got 20 minutes or 10 minutes left of this. So we're trying to get through this life, and it was a nice life. It was a very pleasant life. They were married with a nice family, they had a position in the town, sort of thing. And what the guide said was that your life has got choices. You've got choices in life, and it's not always that the hard choice isn't always the right choice, or the easy choice isn't always the right choice. What it was saying was that basically these two lives, that hard life where you were really angry and you through a lot of emotional stuff, you learn more from that life than you did from that nice simple life where you just lived a nice. And it says, and the challenges and the difficulties, they sometimes bring the most learning. So it can seem like a boring life, but at the same point, sometimes it's the challenges that you go through in that life that are actually growing you. So in a way, every life has got its value. And what I think is that we are an accumulation of all these lives. So even as at the moment who we are the accumulation of all that experience. It's all within us at that subconscious level. And we don't remember the exact maybe lives just normally, but what we have is, I guess, the wisdom maybe at some level that well sits within us. So yeah, so that's the kind of way that I see these lives. Sometimes they seem boring, but over time and the accumulation, it grows us to be maybe more masters of this type of reality, helping other people. Or and funnily enough, as a nurse, there's a lot of the time that a lot of the more ascended people that are here helping end up in jobs like nurses and stuff. They're here helping others, and it doesn't need to be you're a guru out there telling the world all your ideas. You're down there in the coalface helping the day-to-day people, and there's more. I think there's more.
That's more of an impact right there.
Yeah, that's it. And that's a caring person that's caring about people, not sitting there with their ego thinking that they're fantastic and they know all the answers to everything. So telling people what to do. So sometimes the wisest and the maybe the most, you could call it, ascended beings that are here are the ones that are out there making a difference and helping people just day to day.
Right. I really believe that. And kind of like there is a guide in a way, you know, and you show up. I mean, for me, because right now what I do is I work when needed. And it's so interesting when I get called to go into work, I'm at the right situation at the right time. And there's that patient that really needs my specialty, you know, in essence. So it's very interesting. Going back to your boring lives, I just did so I do some shamanic work and I had regressed a couple of my friends just for fun. I was like, hey, let's do this. And they did not believe in hypnosis or past life regression at all. So one of my friends went out and he had the most boring lives, super boring. I found that he was very obsessed with floors and walls. It was weird in all his lives that he went into. And they were boring and draining. And in one life, like you know, I had to make amends with this mother figure and stuff like that. Was interesting. And then he was in this one life that he just did not want to leave because he was surrounded by all these children and family, and he was a very wealthy like landowner or something like that. So that was fascinating. Then I went ahead and regressed his mate, and his mate had a much more interesting lives, you know, where at one point he was a woman and he kept looking at himself in the mirror. He's like, I have beautiful hair and I'm so beautiful. And it was very, very interesting. And then there was one where he died of scurvy at 16. He was on a boat and he didn't even know what scurvy was. And I go, who's that man that you're with? He's like, I go, do you know him from this life? He goes, oh, that's my uncle in this.
Yeah.
It was very, he was so freaked out. He's like, what the hell is scurvy? You know, he Googles it, but it's so interesting because you think that like people go, oh, that's bullshit. You know, there's no such thing as past lives. But here, these guys, I mean, they couldn't, but they were just like telling their friends, just like, wow, this was such a profound experience. You
That's
know,
the best clients. I remember a guy, this big guy with a beard sitting, and he was talking about how he's had little white shoes on and had ribbons in them, and his pretty dress that he was wearing, and I was sitting kind of looking at this guy and nearly laughing just at the the kind of concept of this big beardy guy talking about his little pretty white shoes that he'd got and his white breakfast stuff. And
It's so
and
funny.
and it's even good when you get people that don't actually believe in this type of stuff. Or I mean, I remember one guy experienced these past lives, and his past lives, they're quite, I think one was he was a sword maker, never married. He was making swords in the border of Scotland to fight English people, and that's all he did. It was just made swords for the soldiers. And after
So
it,
funny that you bring that up. I have a story about a sword
yeah,
maker as well. So
yeah,
I'll tell it to you after you're done with your point.
yeah. Well,
But
so basically, it was just that he didn't really. He said to me afterwards, he was quite a broad Glaswegian guy, and he said with the way he spoke and his accent, and he basically said, if you told me about this stuff when I was younger, I would have told you it was a lot of SHI. So he says, but and now I'm kind of a bit, I don't get this. And he went away, and I think he knew my brother, and my brother spoke to him, and he said, see, the funny thing was, he says that all the questions that I was asking him, he knew the answers to them. He says, and it was just like he knew all that was going on. And the best thing about these types of people, the ones that they come in without maybe an expectation or some
right.
expectation of how it should go or whatever. They just come in and see what happens, and it's just quite fascinating when it all goes the way that the way I'll know it will go. But to see someone not coming in with an expectation or possibly some imagined belief of what should happen and create it themselves. Right. And it's when it also the stuff ties into these between lives, and they're saying all the same things. A lot of the time I'm hearing what they're saying and they don't really understand it, but I kind of understand because I've heard so many other people say the same thing.
Right.
So you want to tell me your sword?
My sword story. During COVID, like in 2020, I started dating this guy, and he was very, very tall. He was like 6'6", I believe, or a little bit taller. And again, it's like I had this connection with him, but we were very standoffish with each other, so it was very strange. I knew he didn't like me all that much, but he wanted something from me. So I remember during COVID, he came to stay with me for a couple of days while we were in quarantine, and I had made him this lasagna. And so he was having, and there's something that interesting with a lot of the men that I've dated, and I had to stop dating because it was a lot of karmic stuff that would come out. Either they were triggers, or I could see these guys' past lives, or I could see their childhood traumas, which the childhood traumas were the worst. Because they weren't very nice. So with this one guy, I had made him a lasagna, and I remember he decided to leave, and it was just weird, but he took one of the lasagnas because I had done two, and I just felt very thwarted, like he had taken something from me, because then I saw him on Tinder again, and I was just like, wait a minute, you were just in my home, now you're on Tinder, and you didn't even go home, you went somewhere else. But it was just very strange. So I had this weird vision that just came over me, right? Because we were supposed to have an exchange. He's an artisan actually in this life. He's a welder, and he makes jewelry and stuff. And he was supposed to give me some bracelets that I had him made, and he never brought them. So, and I was upset about that. But then I saw this life, how in a past life he was a sword maker, and I had stolen his swords.
Okay.
So it was like, it was like I was like, whoa.
A little bit of payback.
It was like a payback.
Yeah.
I never told him that, but it was just very, very funny, and then I was seeing other things with him too, but I was just like, whoa. And I told him, I go, you have a lot of things to resolve. You need to go to therapy. And he knew. He was just like, yeah, I'm having trouble. He was very, very stuck in his life. Incredibly talented, incredibly handsome guy, but having a lot of emotional issues, which was fascinating. And but yeah, this stuff is a lot of fun. But and when this happens to me now, I understand it. I get a lot of serendipities, synchronicities, where learned to study them for the last probably 2 or 3 years very intensely, because I was having so many of them, and they have to do with people. And
Mhm.
so, and I think the key to all of that is really to use discernment, because you can go into a wild goose chase and you're like, where have I been led,
Yeah.
which goes into I was reading one of your blogs about us being in a play, and
Mm.
there's the whole simulation theory and all.
Yeah.
I was listening to another podcast this morning about how we're all in a game, or maybe we did die and we are in the in between, and we're just trying to work stuff out to go on to the, like you said, just go on to that next evolutionary
Yeah.
process. Like they were even saying, this is a very interesting concept. Now I'll have to watch the movie Grease again. I don't know if you've ever seen the movie Grease.
In Greece, yeah.
So they're saying that there's a theory out there that the two main characters actually died in the beginning of the movie. And
All
so
right.
they're kind of in this in-between space as they're going through the whole high school process. So it's kind of like a dream fantasy in a way. It's very weird. I'll have to look into that theory. I just heard it this morning. I was like, this is very
Yeah.
interesting. So now I'll have to watch it again. But anyway, I'm going back. Like, so let's talk about your theory about that.
Yeah, the play or the game. Yeah, I mean, the idea of the play, it's, I guess they're kind of concepts to try and help us understand what we're doing here. The play idea is that I probably wrote about was more like we take characters. So Stephen Towill, who I am, I take a character in this sort of play, and it may be that, like you said, with the guy that you regressed, he saw his uncle.
Right.
So very often it's that as a soul group, which is we seem to have these soul groups, and again it's the Dr. Michael Newton talks a lot about soul groups, but and these people's experiences of them, and it's that we're in these kind of groups of learning as souls, and what we're doing is we keep taking these different characters like a play. So this time I might be the Barry guy, the over dominant father that never lets you do anything and is very strict, and maybe someone else in the soul group takes the role of the son, maybe, and
Right.
that son is then dealing with an overpowering father that puts him down, maybe, and through those experiences, he's got the opportunity to overcome that, maybe to grow out of this suppression that he's been put through, and I guess, and so that this is where the both souls are working together to help the other one grow. So it's about the growth of the soul. In the play, it's almost like we're in the characters. We've taken these avatars almost that we
Yes.
will play out the story that will allow us to gain the growth and the expansion that we need, the lessons that we need through this life. Comparing it to a game, again, it's same idea. I mean, if you think about the way a game, if you took something like Super Mario or something, the little guy, your little character bobbing along, and he comes to a ghost and he thinks, or you think, oops, and you try to pass it and you get killed, and you go back to the start now. Who playing Super Mario in a little platform game like that bursts out crying and is devastated that they've just died in their little game? They go back to the start and they start again, and they come along again and they'll come to the little ghost and they think, wait a minute, I died the last time. So if I jump over the top of it, whoops, I'm
Right.
past. And then we're up to the next level now. And there's two ghosts. Now we learned to jump over it last time. Let's try jumping again. Oh, yep, over a platform. And as you go up the level, then it gets harder and harder and harder. And the challenges become, but eventually, as you work your way through that game, beating end of level baddies or the big challenging bits at the end, you continually get better and better till you're a master of that game. And
Right.
that's what I think life is that through our continuous incarnations and growing through lives, we're becoming masters of this game. It's once we become the master of the game, can you imagine like level 65 of Super Mario, someone's struggling and they can't get by this bit, and you go, oh, remember that level 65. Yeah, try and just kind of seeing if you can do this, that, and that, and that maybe help you get by that level. Person goes away and does that. And that's possibly what the guides are like. The guides are these ones that have maybe also been living like we have, but they become the masters of the game and they can help others through their journeys. So that's the way I see it. It's a good way to look at it from the game perspective, is
Right.
that we're just continually working through all these challenges and difficulties, and we may eventually, and we go back and we get another go and we take another character and we work through, and it seems to be that we're also helped to plan a life. So no life is predetermined, but there may be sort of certain aspects, certain people that will be within our lives that will help us to kind of go through that life. And we can choose any path that we want, but generally this life is about particular lessons that we want to learn, whether it's about, I don't know, finding your voice, maybe it's to help others, maybe it's about maybe in another life you've always been a bit selfish, so this time it's about giving more in the next life, and to learn that kind of lesson of giving and find the rewards and how you feel by giving, whereas you've always been taking. So it's a bit of a kind of continuous growth through it, and that's why I see this kind of idea of games or plays. It's a way of looking at it to sort of really try and describe what we're going through.
Yeah, I really love that. I tell people in my storytelling and writing classes that I teach that we're in our own screenplay. That's how I see my life. I'm like, this is my own screenplay. Sometimes I even find that when I'm writing stories, even though some are fiction, all of a sudden it starts happening in my reality, kind of like the movie Stranger Than Fiction, which is very interesting, which has made me stop writing many stories because at the time I didn't understand what it was, since I was creating that through my reality. So I have to be very, very conscious of what is going on and use discernment. I'm like, okay, well, let's just, move it right along. But it's interesting. A couple of the people that I regressed another friend. It was actually through a shamanic journey. And she was a flapper. And this was just so intense because I was also in this journey feeling and seeing what she was seeing. And I could see her dress, which was so beautiful and it had fringes, and she was seeing it too, and it was so beautiful. And she was a dancer on stage, and she remembers seeing all these men that were in the audience, so I don't know if it was kind of like she was a flapper, and there was a piano player. I still remember it speaking about it, but she loved to be on stage and didn't want to come off the stage. But she said after, she's like, this is something I would never do today. But she loved that life. She was like, oh, I want to stay here more, so which was fascinating. And then I regressed a guy that I was dating. We were having many interesting triggers with each other, and I was getting lots of subliminal downloads, and things were coming up in my reality. So we did and I'm having a curandero, a Mexican folk healer on, so I'll kind of go into that story a little bit more there, because I did use some Mexican folk traditional things in that practice. I use many different tools when I do these things. So in this one, I had seen that he was this very powerful centurion, and he had told me he had a past life, and I could see it. And people can see, like, I had taken him to meet I had a witch on this show, and I took him to meet the witch, and the witch saw it too. He's like, whoa, but in this life, he's very much how can I put this? He's just very much a pussy, and very much disempowered, and it's very sad, and he really struggles to find his power.
And that's what he's to experience. It's the opposite.
Right.
It's like, and I think this is why I don't see a lot in whatever it is we're going through. There's usually, it can be a reason for it. I've seen people that have been through some terrible stuff, but what they've gained out of it, they've became so strong, they became amazing people, things that they've did through adversities and difficult things. But the thing I find about the past lives is I always trust in the mind. The mind always seems to know where it needs to go, and the past life that it will bring up, there's usually purpose to it. And what I'm usually looking for is, why are they shown that life? Is it it's usually got some bearing to something that's going on now.
Yes.
So it's always good to try and get the meaning behind why the mind has shown them that life. And it's sometimes the guy, when you go through that past the death points, and you can encounter, you can contact with any other beings that may be guides, or even sometimes it's a family member that will come through and they will answer some of the questions that maybe asked. You could ask something like, what was the reason for that person being shown that life?
Right.
And it may be that they are repeating something at the moment, or it may be that they're going through something that they've actually did before, and they know that they've got the strength to overcome this because they've already done it, and there's where they did it. And it's to remind them that they are actually able to work through whatever it is that they've gone. So it's always nice to find as well that you can do it for a bit of fun. I guess that's why I started way back, was just curiosity, but there's a lot of understanding that can come from the experiences as well.
Yeah, it's very, very fascinating. And that's what I do when I do storytelling and shamanic work, is just to kind of put those puzzle pieces together and correlate them to what's going on with their life now. And trying to like shift that in some way into a positive. For me, I remember I had this past life, and I don't know if some of your clients have this, where all of a sudden I was taken into this life, had these two children. I was walking through this grassy field. I had this very long dress and a bonnet on, and I go into this church, and I look inside, and it's a coffin, and I see this man, and I just immediately felt this intense chest pain that I've never felt in my whole entire life before. Never felt this intense, and I just started bawling. Like I couldn't stop crying, and it was just massive. This was way back, I believe, in 2010. And it turned out that we were plantation owners. And I even was saying like dates of the Gettysburg Address and Lincoln, and I knew these dates. It was wild. I mean, I can't tell you what the dates are. I knew what they were then. I remember, and it was just such a wild experience. And and it was just a very brutal death, and she had taken over my life. She's like, well, your slaves must have you must have been so bad to them. And well, like I go, well, I don't know. But it's interesting, this same guy that was in the coffin, I believe, was the same one that I told you was the centurion. The same thing, because I had this immense love for this man in that whole scenario. But it was very, very fascinating. And I had told you, he's like, oh yeah, I had a life as a plantation owner too. So it is a lot of fun. It is interesting. It makes, I think, life much more fun, right?
Yeah, it gives us more I think this is the thing, that some people are happy just to get on with life, and that's fair enough. In fact, they'll learn the lessons as they go. But for me, I'm really interested in I guess, more. I like to just know, expand my mind a little bit and just understand
Right.
more about who we are, why we're here, what we're doing here. And I've learned a lot through this type of work. It really does. I mean, it can help a lot of people as well, not just sort of out of curiosity and stuff. It really can help people shift, and even hypnotherapy itself is an amazing tool to help people with a lot of stuff. So it can be quite fascinating. The mind, I think the mind is just, that's what we are, and we sort of maybe don't pay it much attention. I don't think we get too busy getting caught up with the body or the
True.
day-to-day dramas, but the mind is incredible. It's a powerful, powerful thing, and it's what I think what we are. We're a consciousness. We're a consciousness, a conscious intelligence, and an awareness, and we probably know a lot more than what we probably realize as we sort of work our way through this life.
It's very interesting. One more thing I want to talk about, then we'll go ahead and wrap it up, is just about the advanced race of humans, and talking about that, and Atlantis and stuff, because you did write about it in one of your blogs.
Yeah. Again, it's fascinating. I mean, you can go back and look at things like Edgar Cayce, who was a guy that wrote stuff. He, again, another guy using hypnosis, and he would bring out all this information, healing information for people. But I mean, I've experienced people having the same types of things. It's this advanced race that has existed before. And when you mentioned Atlantis, that's one of the places that seems to come up a lot. Is that Lemuria is another one where we've had, if you look at some of the things that are on Earth now, you could look at the pyramids. The pyramids were supposed to be, according to history, built in 20 years. But I think there's some statistic, I wrote it in my blog and I can't remember what it is, but it's something like, in order for that to have happened, they would have had to have been quarrying, carving the stone, transporting the stone, and placing it there's something like 2 million stones or something in the Great Pyramid.
Right.
And it's something like they would have had to do that one every second or something ridiculous like that. They'd have carried it all these miles, they would have carved it, quarried it, and placed it. And these stones are precision engineered. They're really like, I think some of the stones are so accurate. I've seen specialists say that it would take, in modern days, it would take precision, it would take lasers to cut to that precision. So there's a lot of stuff.
Have you been to Egypt to see them? I've been to Peru, and they're so perfect, these stones, because they have similar but different. But again, the stones are just so just perfect and soft, and just the way they're cut. Yeah,
I've never been to Egypt, but I've been to Mexico, and this is the thing that fascinated me as a kid, was how all these pyramids are all over the place. There's some in Egypt, there's some in Mexico. They're even saying that there's some in China. There's some in China as well. So
yeah, I heard
they're
that.
all over the world, but I guess it's the intelligence that has created these things. The Great Pyramid, I think, it's almost the perfect north, in alignment with perfect magnetic north and things. It's the science behind it, the Fibonacci code, and
Fibonacci.
the golden number. All of these things were all known by these people building these things way back then, and this is what. So I guess from history, we can't understand it, so we try to put some rational thought and just accept it. Like 20 years, even though it couldn't have been done under a chisel and a copper mallet and a rock to chisel these things.
Right.
But through these experiences, people do go to past lives and other places, and it doesn't even need to be. This is where it gets weird. You've got someone on talk about UFOs. There's people talk. Again, I've wrote blogs about this, and it's that there is no.
That's right. You've had some patients or some clients talking about UFOs and abductions. Like,
and
talk about that a little bit.
Yeah, well, it's the whole idea is that we are conscious energies of intelligence, and someone that's, we call them aliens. Aliens just basically means something we don't know or can't understand, but there's a lot of people that have experienced, and Dolores Cannon writes a lot. She actually specialized in the alien side of this with the hypnosis, and she started investigating people that had lost time, and they thought they'd been abducted. And what was actually coming out was that these beings, that we were one of them, the beings, and that although we are living this life on Earth as a human, we're also helped again at some point. These, whether they're in different dimensions, I don't know, but they're basically helping us at the same point. And this is what a lot of people will come up with. I had, in fact, a client a couple of days ago that went through an experience of being an alien. It was like she was describing a really strange looking body that she had, and the way that her fingers were and the feet. And she says, and there's others. And she started crying, saying, "This is my family. This is me." And she was so upset, but she was so happy that this is where she said, I've always been looking for home, and
Right.
these beings, this is my family. But she's came here to help. Apparently,
Right.
that's what. So it's the way I see it is there's no such thing as aliens as such. Aliens is a word that that doesn't mean we don't understand. I think we are a conscious awareness we're in some kind of matrix or a game that we're taking this form as a human,
Right.
but
Mm-hmm.
as a conscious being, we could be many other things. We've came here to try and help this, I guess, this world along. It's maybe not kind of going, it needs a bit of help. So this is where this idea is that there's a lot coming in now to help to try and
Right.
raise that vibration a little bit.
Right. And there's a lot of babies being born too, and they can see that in the future that's what they're going to be doing. They're just very special. There's just some kind of energy about them.
Mm-hmm.
So it's interesting to see what's going to happen.
Exactly.
So it's an exciting time right now. And it's really how you look at it. Like there's so much more um there. And stuff. I've also often felt that my home is not here. Like I remember I've had times where I've been like, I want to go home, but I'm home. It's just a
Yeah.
very strange, uneasy feeling. Um, and I read this book, and it's a sci-fi book. It's written by a man named Kim Stanley, I believe, is the author's name, and it's called Galileo's Dream. And in the book, it's very history focused about the Galileo and that whole time, which is a very fascinating time because there was so much technology that was invented. And so you kind of think, is this book real? But Galileo has these, in his mind, he time travels to a different space, and he goes forward in time into the future, and he's on a different planet. He's actually on the Jovian moons that he discovered. And so he meets with these people, and there's this big war, and he's helping them, but they also give them all these ideas for his technologies that he developed, which is very, very interesting. And they also go back in time for him. It's like they regress him, and they tell him, oh, look, you weren't such a great father, or this and this happened with the women you were um cajoling with, or whatever, and this happened with your mother. And so it's a very fascinating book. So you kind of almost think like, was it real? But it goes to that whole effect that
Yeah.
and I think in one of the movies, one of the it was about Wolverine, but it's not one of the Wolverine movies, where he goes back in time to help the professor, but he time travels in his mind. So it's
Yeah.
not like I think that you're actually abducted.
Yeah.
I don't know. Are your clients saying that they're actually they physically left their bodies, or it was just in their mind that they left, but their shell is here, but their
Yeah.
soul is like somewhere else in a way?
It's a bit of a mixture. There is some people that, again, it could be that the body has been taken up because the body maybe needs adjustments or whatever. Or it can be that, I guess, with that one that I was talking about this week, that was I guess she's experiencing, and it is within the mind. That's, again, it's I could talk for this forever, but if you
Oh my
even
gosh,
look,
me too.
you can look at science. If we look at the actual structure of this entire universe, this world, it's constructed by atoms, and atoms are 99.99999999999% 6% of space, with a nucleus in the middle and a negative charged electrons going round. And apparently atoms are the building blocks of our world. But if they're 99.999 of space, and within the nucleus, you've got the proton and the neutron, and within them, it's things called quarks that don't apparently exist. They appear, and they're events that appear, disappear, energies. So that's what we're built of. We're built of some sort of energetic sort of, well, an atom, which is, and the element of the physical is, it's the negative charged electrons of each of the atoms repelling each other. So what
Right.
we feel is when we touch is the it's repelling of negative charged electrons. So it brings you to this perspective that we're living in some kind of energetic construct that we believe to be some kind of the reality. And but there's much more than that. There's, I guess you could look to dimensions and that whether there's aliens, they're within, they could be right next to us right now, but they're out with our perception of our five senses at the moment. So they're there, but we don't perceive them.
Right. It's all very fascinating.
Yeah.
Well, tell people where they can find you. I'm going to go ahead and link your website and information on the show notes.
Yeah, so I do a lot on Instagram. That's probably my biggest platform for putting stuff out. So that's just Stephen with a PH and Towill, TOWILL _ so that's the little line underneath, hypnotherapy. And my website is just stephentowill.com. So they're probably the two best places to reach me.
Awesome. And you have amazing memes, by the way. I love your memes.
That's it. Like a bit of humor to the world that needs it.
Totally. Well, thank you so much, Stephen.
Okay, not a problem. It's been really nice to be here.
Awesome.